For all you Star Trek fans out there, are you a Trekkie?
Never been a Trekkie.
Okay, for you Trekkies out there, you all know this phrase, space, the final frontier. It is also the final frontier for the U.S. military. Future wars could include attacks in space, and not in a galaxy far, far away, but right above Earth's atmosphere. We're not talking about troops with laser guns in space. We're talking about things like strikes on satellites, which could disrupt our military operations and our way of life right here on Earth. And that is a threat right now. That's why the Space Force was created 5 years ago by bipartisan legislation signed by President Trump. And by the way, it was the first new branch of the armed services to be established since 1947. And before it was created, the different military branches had different responsibilities in space, and it was complicated. So with the Space Force, all military operations in space are now under one umbrella. So why is this important? Well, not only do we have the International Space Station and manned spacecraft up there, but thousands of critical satellites that allow for everyday things, from you using your GPS on your cell phone or swiping a credit card to satellites that support our armed forces, including missile warning systems, which are critical. That is key because countries like China and Russia are two of our biggest competitors up in space. And if a conflict were to break out in the near future, our assets way up in the sky, above the atmosphere, could be targeted.
Way up there. Commercial targets are within the realm. So what exactly every day do the men and women of the U.S. Space Force do, and how concerned should everyday Americans be about the potential for future confrontations up there in the heavens? Joining us now are the Space Force's General Michael Guetlein and the Chief Master Sergeant John Bentivegna. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. We were talking for a moment just before you came on set here, and I found a quote here from the Vice Chairman of America's Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said recently, quote, "Space has emerged as our most essential warfighting domain." That sounds like job security, General.
It absolutely is. So what has happened over time is space has become the foundation for not only our military forces, but also for our way of life. So Adrian, like you talked about, not only is it GPS, but GPS drives our ATM networks, it drives our infrastructure. Without GPS, we couldn't get goods to the shelves, we couldn't get ambulances to the hospital, our infrastructure wouldn't work. And it is up to the 15,000 men and women guardians that we have today in the United States Space Force to protect and defend and ensure that capability will be available for the warfighters, as well as for our nation during times of peace, as well as during crisis.
So who do you see as the biggest threat in space? Because Russia and China have already demonstrated that they can take down a satellite. They've shot down their own, right? They deny the reasons. They say that they did it for their own purposes, or that it wasn't any kind of threat or signal. But how threatening is that?
We see China as our pacing competitor. They're the ones with the most technologically advanced capabilities in space. We have watched them with robots in space, grab another robot, tow it to another orbit, drop it off, and come back to where they started. We have watched them jamming our satellites, jamming GPS. We've watched their counter space capabilities and test on orbit. They have a significant amount of capability. We also should not underestimate the Russians. The Russians have also got a significant amount of capability, and they have what we call a nesting doll in space, a satellite that hosts another satellite, that hosts a kill vehicle that can take out a satellite. Those are very, those capabilities are very critical, and they are unsafe and unprofessional, and we don't know what their intent is, so it keeps us on our game to be competitive.
So, Sergeant, the Space Force was created, Space Command, in 2019 under the Trump administration, but I was doing some background reading, and the germ of the idea seems to go all the way back to 2001. There was a bipartisan congressional committee talked about the potential for a Pearl Harbor in space, a kind of intergalactic event. When the men and women of the Space Force are monitoring the skies, where are they doing it from? What kind of technology do we have? And what are we most concerned about?
Yeah, so I think you're referencing that Rumsfeld report. I think it was in 2001.
Yeah, Space Pearl Harbor, 2001, yeah.
That talked about that. You know, when you think about where Guardians are today, we're stationed around the world using ground-based sensors, using space-based sensors. We are also leverage a lot of commercial capability as well to kind of integrate. You know, space is a big place, you know, but it's not as far away as you think. You know, 62 miles above is the Kármán line where space begins. So it's a big area of responsibility. So leveraging as much capabilities as we can, not only what we organically have within the Department of Defense and the Space Force, but also leveraging commercial capabilities as well. But it's space domain awareness is key. That's the first thing that's foundational to kind of what we do day to day as Guardians.
And Chief Master Sergeant, a lot of people think of space and the U.S. government, they think of NASA. Can you distinguish the two for us?
Yeah, so NASA absolutely is a civil organization. But as a matter of fact, there's a Guardian that's on the space station right now, Colonel Nick Hague. is a Guardian that was the first Guardian to launch the International Space Station a couple months ago. But he's there just doing civil work with NASA. And that relationship between the Space Force and NASA very much keeps separate between what the Department of Defense, National Security, and what civil responsibilities are. But that relationship, especially when we talk about space domain awareness, you have an opportunity to go on to an operations floor of Vandenberg Space Force Base. There are young Guardians that are using these sensors, and they're telling NASA whether or not something may hit the International Space Station. I think this year alone, it's been over 1,000 notifications to NASA for a possible maybe collision with the International Space Station. Now, some of those are very far away, but we watch them very closely. But that's an example of the relationship between the Space Force, space domain awareness, and what we provide NASA.
Very, very interesting. General, there's a big conversation right now about cost cutting in Washington. I think your budget last year was about $26 billion compared to the Air Force, which is $180-something billion. Is that enough money going forward? What do you need going forward?
It is not enough. Chief kind of talked about, hey, we have the biggest area of responsibility, but we also have the smallest force and the smallest budget. We are only 3% of the DoD budget, trying to protect and defend the greatest amount of space out there. And because we're the foundation for the way we fight, as well as our economy, we've got to significantly plus up the Space Force budget to be able to get after the demands from the nation and from the combatant commanders.
And I just love that members of the Space Force are called Guardians.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And your motto, Sempre?
Sempre Supra.
Sempre Supra, always above. It's great. Gentlemen, thank you so much, General.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Here.
Happy holidays.